Alright guys, how's it doing? This video will not have gameplay. I'm just gonna kind of explain some tanks and some gameplay styles here for you guys. And this time we're gonna do the Russian tanks. You start with the MS-1. This lovely little tank is kind of slow and inaccurate. It's really basically the general description of a lot of Russian tanks. Its gun is fairly inaccurate compared to others, .4 accuracy, but it has a ton of damage, and you can really take out other tier 1 tanks pretty easily with that thing, if you get the drop on them. If you don't, or if it's long range, the German one will tend to handle that. Um, as far as light tanks go, there's not a whole lot of them. I believe there is the T-26 here, which is the branch leading towards the heavy line, has firepower. I believe the T-46 is also a light tank. Yep, the T-46 is basically a T-26 with a bigger gun and more health. There's not a whole lot of difference between those two. But over here we have the BT-2, BT-7, and A-20, which are all very maneuverable light tanks, and the A-20 is considered a scout light tank. So it will be put in very high tier battles. It makes it very hard to grind through this tank because it gets placed in matches with IS-3s, etc. And that leads towards the medium line. Now the Russian medium line is right here. It's T-34 through T-54 as of right now, along with the KV-13. The T-34 is very nice tier 5 medium. It has a nice gun, very nice penetration, high rate of fire, decent damage. And then the T-34-85 is the first of the Russian mediums to use a 100mm gun. Kind of lacks in accuracy, but the penetration and damage is very nice, especially at tier 6. It makes this thing kind of not so much a brawler because it doesn't really have the armor, because it's only got 45mm armor, which is the same as the T-34, which makes them both very squishy, so if they get shot at, it's more than likely going to go through. Makes it kind of a sniper-ish kind of tank, like try and stay back. The T-43 is has more armor. It's 75 armor. It's still not very much, and it's actually kind of slowish as far as medium tanks go, so it's also not very good at brawling, which is kind of sad. But then when you hit the T-44 down here, the tier 8 medium tank, you get back some of your speed that you had back at the T-34. But it also gets the 122, which is actually the first time you see that. A little bit less accuracy, same penetration, way more damage. But you lose that on fire rate. I'm pretty sure a lot of people tend to stick with the 100mm all the way through the medium line just because it's more useful. Especially once you get the vertical stabilizers that the T-44 and T-54 can get for equipment, which lets you hit stuff on the move, which is pretty sweet. Let's see here. And then once you're done with the T-44, which is actually the first one that actually gets a decent amount of armor, it's 90mm, but it's actually highly sloped. I wanted to show you guys these tanks, but I don't actually have them, so whatever. Later on I'll show like specific maps, techniques for certain tanks and stuff like that, but right now I'll just kind of explain it. So it's 90mm hull and 120 turret, which is pretty nice. Oh, and I forgot to mention something. This T-34-85 that I said has very little armor, it gets a turret, and this is at tier 6, it gets a turret with 115 armor, and it's actually really quite sloped from the front right there, and there's Doom talking to me. How you doing, Doom? Anyway, so that's actually really cool. You can hold down with that thing, kind of like the American tanks. I'll talk about that when I actually get to those tanks. But the T-54, a lot of people call it OP. It's really not. It gets a decent gun, 219 pen, 320 damage, pretty accurate. But the thing about it is the armor. It's got 120 hull and 200 turret. That hull armor is very, very sloped. I've bounced BL-10 shots off of the front of T-54s before. For those of you who don't know BL-10, I'll talk about that later. It's a very, very high penetration gun. But that is a very good scout tank for clan wars. A lot of clans use T-54s or Pattons for scouting. Um, and it's also a very good brawler. You can circle many tanks to death with that thing. And then there's the KV-13, which is a branch between the heavy and the medium line. You can go to either from it. It's actually pretty nice. It's got 100 armor, way more than the T-43. And it hits a 85 millimeter gun. Yes, it does, with decent accuracy, decent pin, and decent damage. So if you're planning on going through both of these lines, like I did, I went through them before there was a KV-13. I would recommend going through one of them, like to the KV-1S or the T-34-85, not both unless you really want to, and then just use the KV-13 to jump between them. Um, but anyway, onto heavy tanks here. We have the KV, which is also considered kind of OP. It will be split between the KV-1 and the KV-2. The KV-2 you can see right here is the one with this turret. This is the bobblehead turret, as it is called. It's or the refrigerator turret or anything like that. It's basically the giant block that sits on top of the KV. Um, oh, that's just a weird ad. But it leads to the KV-1S, KV-3, and the S51, and it has a 152 millimeter derp gun, as it is called, because you can see at tier 5, 700 damage. 0.6 accuracy, which is terrible, but 700 damage at tier 5, and it also gets the 107, which is very nice gun. People use it on the KV-2 and the KV-3, so that's typically what they do. But then you can either branch to the KV-1S or the KV-3. Later on, the KV-3 will be up a tier, so yeah, we'll see about that. It'll lead to a different branch, and I'll talk about that in a second here. Actually, I probably won't. I'll just have to like add on to this later when there's more tanks in the game and stuff. But the KV-1S is basically a mini IS. It is very maneuverable, has a 122 millimeter gun, but it is very, very lightly armored for heavy tanks. 75 hull armor, 82 turret. Whereas the KV-3 is very heavily armored. It is a very slow tank, though. You won't be reaching 32 kilometers an hour very often. But that hull armor and the turret armor really lets you pretty much demolish tier 6 and below games. But then you get the IS, which, as I said, is a larger KV-1S. Basically, it gets a 122, and it gets the hull armor of the KV-3, which at that tier isn't very helpful. But it is a very maneuverable tank. That's the thing with the Russian tanks. They're all very maneuverable compared to the others. Um, at least on average, all of the tanks are very maneuverable. The KV and the KV-3 are not very maneuverable. But anyway, the IS gets 122. The 122 and the 100 millimeter, as you saw, they tend to carry through lines, but they get better as they go. Like the 100 millimeter in the medium line gets more rate of fire. The 122 in the heavy line gets more rate of fire and eventually more penetration. But anyway, you get the IS-3, which is a heavily maneuverable tank, but it lacks hull armor. It has pretty nice turret armor, 201, 148 for the upgraded. The pancake turret, as it's called, gets 220, 110. The pancake turret is the one seen in this picture. And the upgraded turret is the T10. You can Google that. It's kind of a domed shape. Actually, I could just show it to you because I have an IS-3. This is the T10 turret with the BL9 upgraded gun, by the way. But that tank right there is very maneuverable. You've probably seen me use it. You can get places quick. You can get out of places quick. And it's the first Russian tank to get 225 pin, which is very helpful. That lets you pin King Tigers, etc., IS-4s, and stuff like that. Or not very easy, but far easier than before. And it leads to the IS-4. The IS-4 will eventually be a tier 10 tank, and it is very, very heavily armored. Tanks that do not have above tanks that don't have 225 pin will have very, very difficult times penetrating this tank. It's pretty weak in the rear though, so you got to keep that protected. But it is one of the very few tanks with front and side hull armor that is very high, and then the turret is basically impenetrable to a bunch of tanks, especially once it's upgraded. I can't remember what it's upgraded turret is. Yeah, 250, 200. Yeah, good luck with that. And it's sloped, so yeah, whatever. But it gets the 130 meter S70 right now, which is huge pin, huge damage, nice accuracy, decent fire rate. It is the same gun the IS-7 used, and the IS-7 kind of goes back to what the IS-3 is. It has that pike armor, and it has speed and maneuverability, especially for a tier 10. So that lets you get around pretty quickly. It also has the same weakness of the IS-3, and that is very weak side and rear armor. Oh no, it doesn't have weak side. I thought it did. Well, it has weak rear. 60 millimeters on a tier 10, which I'm pretty sure is worse than IS-3. No, it's the same as the IS-3. I'm just failing right now. But that's a pretty good tank. I'm gonna have it eventually, obviously, but uh, most people prefer the IS-4 over the IS-7 due to the armoring. And the fact that for the IS-3 and the IS-7, you want to point to your hull directly at enemies like this to get the maximum armor. But then that exposes your weakness, which is this plate down here, which has less armor and less slope than the main plate up here. But you can see that main plate has a ton of slope, not only in this direction, but it also slopes out that way. So yeah, you can bounce a fair number of shells off of the front of this thing. What else here? Let's tank destroyers. The AT-1, a very good tank destroyer, demolishes low tiers. Su-70, it gets, what does it get? 76 millimeter gun at tier 2. Yeah, that damage, 105 damage, that just demolishes tanks. Su-76 is kind of meh. As you can see, I didn't stay in it very long. It's got a decent gun, but the armoring is lacking and the maneuverability is kind of lacking. Su-85B is the same thing, it's just an upgraded 76 with a bigger gun. It does have a nice gun at that tier, so you can take out some tanks quite nicely. Then we have the Su-85, which gets, looky there, a 107. This is the gun to use on a Su-85 unless you're just bursting through it like I was there. Very nice accuracy, nice pin, nice damage. You would just destroy tier 5 games in that tank. The Su-100 gets a 122, oddly enough. It should be the Su-122, but whatever. Which gives you the same damage as the same damage and pin as the heavy tanks, but a bit more rate of fire. That's the thing with tank destroyers. You'll get guns of like a tier higher or something like that, but then you get more rate of fire as well. Su-152 is the first tank destroyer where it gets a derp gun stock, so it gets basically the same thing as the KV, except slightly more penetration. You can use AP in this derp gun if you want and go for like side or rear shots, and you'll just destroy tanks. And then the ISU 152 is where the fun starts at the late tiers. You get the 152mm BL-10, which is your tier 10 gun for the Russian tank destroyers. The Russian tank destroyers are the only tank destroyer line that does not get 2 tier 10 guns. They only get 1, and it's this one. It gets decent-ish rate of fire. 4 is for the 704, 3.9 is for the ISU, not much difference. But you get 286 pin, 750 damage, and pretty decent accuracy. That enables you, and the ISU has no armor, by the way. The Su has very little armor as well, Su-152. You're very squishy, but once you get this gun, you will basically scare people, and they'll be too afraid of you to basically charge. I've seen like 3, 4, 5, or 6 people just sit behind a corner because they don't want to get shot. But then that leads to the 704, which is the first tank destroyer that's actually decently armored, and it's actually not that good. It's 120mm hull armor, and it's sloped pretty decently. I have beta videos of it. You can bounce some stuff on it. But it's this mantlet right here that's really powerful. That's like 300mm of armor or something. So if you can force people to shoot at your mantlet, that'll give you plenty of time to reload and get shots off. It's also, one thing I want to point out is the Russian tank destroyers really don't have a whole lot of view range, but their camo rating is very, very good. So you can hide these dudes in bushes, and you won't be spotted unless you shoot with someone. And they're all maneuverable. They're all really quite maneuverable. Even the AT-1's maneuverable for a tier 2 tank. So you can get to places quick, you can get out of places, etc., etc. You're not stuck somewhere you're going, which you'll see in a later tank I talk on the USA line. You're basically stuck going one way. And finally, artillery. There's not much to say about artillery. I'm gonna later on show you some things to do when you're artillery when I do these Hummel games. I did buy my Hummel back. I need the gun length drive, and that'll be it. So who was it? Miss Pac-Man. Your wish is coming soon. I also need to buy a Slugger back. So whoever wanted the Slugger will get to see that soon. Um, it's artillery. There's really nothing special to say about it. The Su-26 gets a very nice gun. You can see here the ammo you actually want to use is this second one here. It's more expensive, but you're going to get more money for using it. It gives you more damage, same penetration for a little bit more cost. And it has a fully rotatable turret. So this is 360 degree. You don't need to turn the hull like in other artillery pieces to aim at people. That enables you to actually keep your aim pretty darn accurate even while following people. So that's pretty sweet. And then the Su-14 and S-51 both get really powerful guns. The thing with Russian artillery is they're really not that accurate until you get to the final tank. The final tanks, I should say. That one's not really that accurate either. But the thing they have is a high trajectory as far as I've seen. Like the S-51 or 212, which I've played on Doom's account. They both appear to have a higher trajectory, at least than the Hummel. I know the Hummel has a pretty low one, which keeps your aiming circle actually a circle, which helps you hit things instead of ellipse. Like you'll see with the Hummel, the aiming is actually an ellipse, which makes it pretty hard to actually hit people more often. So that gives these Russian artillery quite a bit of an advantage there. And the final one here is something to point out. Artillery really doesn't have a whole lot of armor. This one's got decent 75 armor in the front, so you can bounce small arms fire from like light tanks and stuff like that. But the gun it gets is what I want to talk about. .37 accuracy on an artillery gun is very good. That's like the accuracy on heavy tanks and stuff like that on the Russian line. But here you'll see something interesting. 360 penetration with 1100 damage. Whoop! What did I just do there? I clicked something. Whatever. That is AP rounds. Russian artillery has an advantage that they can use AP rounds on a lot of their tanks, on a lot of their artillery, I should say. And 360 pin will pin basically everything. And that 1100 damage may seem silly when you have 1700 right next to it. But if you don't pin with HE, you lose half of that damage. So that 1100 guaranteed damage is actually quite nice. And the reason most people don't use AP is because of the accuracy on these other tanks. Like you see here, 0.48 to 0.5 is really quite inaccurate. So if you use AP, you're not guaranteed a hit like you are with this 180 millimeter. And AP does not have splash, so if you miss, you got nothing, as opposed to HE, where if you hit near them, you'll blow off a track and take like 10% or something like that. So that's actually quite an advantage there. But yep, I like to do vertical stabilizers on every Russian tank I can because they're typically more mobile. You'll always want a rammer on these tanks, and then for your final one, you can either do ventilation, which is recommended for a ton of things. If you have a slot, basically, you can do ventilation. Camouflage net for tank destroyers or artillery, and then binocular telescopes for tank destroyers is kind of useful for some of them, like the 704. Gives it view range that can be competitive. So yeah, there you go. I guess that kind of covers the basics of it. I'll do like details of certain ones later on, and how to use them and stuff like that. But I hope that helps out some people, like if they want to use Russian tanks. Most of the Russian tanks are fairly lightly armored, but they're very mobile, lightly armored in comparison to other things. They're basically the all-around tank. They're very easy for beginners to play because of the playstyle they have. So yeah, a lot of beginners go here, and then people say, oh, Russian tanks are bias or whatever. They're really not. They're fairly balanced. It's the play style they use that a lot of beginners can use pretty easily. Even the developers said it's kind of the beginner style play tank. But anyway, I hope that helps. I'll see you guys later. If I hit the right button, I'll see you guys later.